Is that Ella? The whispered words cut through the church like a knife, and I felt my wedding dress suddenly weigh 1,000 pounds. I turned toward the grand doors I had watched my blind twin sister walk through in tears just hours earlier, expecting to see nothing. Instead, my heart stopped. There she was.
Ella.
My identical twin. The sister I had just humiliated and cast out of my own wedding was walking back through those doors in a flowing champagne gown that made her look like royalty. But that wasn't what made every guest in that church fall completely silent. It was the man beside her. Tall, distinguished, with the kind of quiet confidence that commanded respect without saying a word. His hand gently guided my sister's arm as she walked with perfect grace down the aisle I was supposed to be walking down. Even from behind, I could see every woman in the church staring at him with the kind of recognition that comes when you're in the presence of serious money and power. But how are you doing today? I hope you're somewhere comfortable, because this story is going to take you on a ride that will make you question everything you think you know about love, family, and what really matters in life. Whether you're watching this at home, at work, or maybe even hiding in your car during lunch break, I promise you're going to want to hear every single word of what happened next. And honestly, I hope the weather is nice wherever you are, because after hearing my story, you might need some fresh air to process it all. You know what they say about karma, right? That it has a way of showing up exactly when you think you've gotten away with something terrible. Well, I'm living proof that karma doesn't just show up. Sometimes it walks through your church doors wearing a designer gown and holding the hand of a billionaire. My name is Emma Chen. And this is the story of how I went from being the perfect bride planning the perfect wedding to watching my blind twin sister walk back into my life with more dignity and grace than I had ever possessed, accompanied by a man who saw her worth when I was too shallow and selfish to see it myself. I can still remember that moment like it was burned into my retinas. Ella standing there in that incredible dress, her sightless eyes somehow looking directly at me with a calm smile that said everything. And him, Daniel Carter. I didn't know who he was then, but everyone else in that church sure did. The way people were starting to pull out their phones and whisper to each other told me this wasn't just any random guy who had decided to help a blind woman. This was someone important. Someone powerful. Someone who had chosen my sister. The sister I had just told to leave because she would ruin the pictures. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And trust me, you're going to want to subscribe, because what happens next will change how you think about family forever. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how two sisters who once shared everything ended up on opposite sides of a church aisle, with one of them discovering just how wrong she had been about everything. Ella and I were 24 when this happened. We had been inseparable our entire lives. Identical twins who did everything together, thought alike, even finished each other's sentences. We were the kind of twins people would point to and say, "Look how close they are. That's real sisterly love." I believed in fairy tales back then. I believed that love conquered all, that family was forever, and that being a good person meant good things happen to you. I believed that my twin sister and I would always be each other's best friends, each other's maids of honor, each other's biggest supporters no matter what life threw at us. I also believed that when I found the man of my dreams, everything would fall perfectly into place. The perfect wedding, the perfect life, the perfect happiness that I had been planning since I was a little girl playing dress-up in our mother's wedding veil. But most of all, I believed that nothing could ever come between Ella and me. We were two halves of the same whole. We shared the same face, the same DNA, the same memories of growing up in our little apartment where our single mother worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed. We had survived everything together. Until the accident. Until I met Ryan. Until I became someone I didn't recognize. Until the day I chose a man who cared more about appearances than he did about my heart, and I let him convince me that my sister's blindness was something to be ashamed of instead of something that made her stronger than I ever was. The day I asked my own twin sister to leave my wedding because she might ruin the pictures was the day I stopped being the person Ella and I had grown up believing I was. But I didn't know that yet. I thought I was just making a practical decision. I thought I was protecting my special day. I had no idea I was about to discover that Ella had spent the months leading up to my wedding quietly building a life that would put mine to shame. A life with someone who saw her blindness not as a flaw to hide, but as part of what made her extraordinary. But that revelation was still hours away as I stood at the altar in my $1,000 dress, watching my sister walk toward me with a man who would soon teach me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who truly sees you. To understand how I became the kind of person who could ask her blind sister to leave her own wedding, you need to know who Ella and I used to be. And more importantly, you need to understand the moment everything changed between us. We grew up sharing everything. One bedroom, one closet, one dream of someday having enough money that our mom wouldn't have to work herself to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. Ella was born 12 minutes after me, but she always acted like the older sister. More patient, more thoughtful, more willing to give up the last piece of cake or the better bed by the window. Even as kids, people could tell us apart not by how we looked, but by how we acted. I was the one who wanted the spotlight, who raised my hand first in class, who demanded attention. Ella was the one who listened, who remembered everyone's birthday, who somehow always knew exactly what to say when someone was hurting. Our mother used to joke that God made us as a set because alone, we would have been too much. Emma needs Ella to keep her grounded, she would say, and Ella needs Emma to help her fly. The accident happened on a Tuesday, March 15th. We were 16, and I had convinced Ella to sneak out with me to go to Jason Miller's party.
She didn't want to go.
She never wanted to break rules. But I had been begging for weeks because Jason was a senior and he had actually invited me, and I thought this was my chance to finally be seen as cool instead of just one of the Chin twins who lived in the crappy apartments near the highway. Come on, Ella, I had whispered that night as we climbed out our bedroom window. Live a little. What's the worst that could happen? I can still remember her laugh. Soft and nervous, but trusting.
She always trusted me.
Even when my ideas were stupid, even when I was being reckless, Ella always believed that I knew what I was doing. The party was exactly what I expected. Loud music, cheap beer, older kids who made me feel sophisticated just by letting me stand near them. I was having the time of my life, flirting with boys who had never noticed me before, feeling like I was finally becoming the person I was supposed to be. Ella spent most of the night sitting on a couch in the corner, looking uncomfortable but staying because I had asked her to. Every once in a while, I would catch her eye across the room and she would smile at me, and I would feel this little stab of guilt that I was having fun while she was miserable. But not enough guilt to leave. When Jason offered to drive us home, I said yes without even asking Ella. He had been drinking, but not that much, I thought. And his car was so much nicer than the bus we usually took. I wanted to feel important, wanted to feel like the kind of girl who got rides from cute senior boys instead of taking public transportation like a kid. Ella tried to object when she realized how much Jason had been drinking. I can still see her face, the way she grabbed my arm and whispered, "Emma, maybe we should call a cab." But I was already in the passenger seat, already caught up in the fantasy of this perfect night, already too proud to admit that maybe my little sister was right. "Don't be such a baby, Ella," I said. Words that still echo in my nightmares 15 years later.
He's fine.
Just get in. She got in because I asked her to.
Because she trusted me.
Because even when she knew something was wrong, she believed I would keep her safe. The crash happened 6 blocks from our house. Jason ran a red light and hit a delivery truck going 40 miles an hour. I walked away with a few cuts and bruises. Jason broke his arm and got arrested for DUI. Ella lost her sight. Traumatic brain injury, the doctors called it. Damage to her visual cortex that was permanent and irreversible. One moment she was my identical twin sister who saw the world exactly the same way I did, And the next moment, she was living in complete darkness because I had been too selfish and stubborn to listen to her fears. The guilt nearly destroyed me. For months after the accident, I could barely look at Ella without feeling sick. Every time I saw her learning to navigate the world with her hands instead of her eyes, every time I watched her struggle with simple things that used to be effortless, I was reminded that this was my fault. But Ella never once blamed me. Not even when she was lying in that hospital bed with bandages over her eyes. Not even when the doctors explained that the damage was permanent. Not even when she realized that all her dreams of becoming an art teacher were suddenly impossible. It was an accident, she would say whenever I tried to apologize. Emma, it was just an accident. You didn't know. But I did know. Deep down, I knew Jason was too drunk to drive. I knew we should have called for a ride. I knew Ella's instincts were better than mine. I just chose to ignore all of that because I wanted something more than I wanted to keep her safe. The accident changed both of us, but in different ways. Ella became even more patient, more compassionate, more determined to find beauty in a world she could no longer see. She learned Braille, learned to navigate with a cane, learned to identify people by their voices and their footsteps. She developed this incredible ability to sense emotions that other people missed, to offer comfort in ways that went deeper than sight. I became harder, more focused on appearances, on success, on proving that I was worth something despite what I had done. I threw myself into college, into internships, into building a life that looked perfect from the outside. I told myself I was doing it for both of us, that if I could just achieve enough, earn enough, become enough, somehow it would balance out what I had taken from her. That's the mindset I was in when I met Ryan 3 years later. I was working as a junior marketing coordinator at a tech company downtown, living in a tiny studio apartment and surviving on ramen noodles and ambition. Ryan was a client, representing a startup that was looking for help with their brand image. He was 28, confident, incredibly handsome in that clean-cut, expensive suit kind of way that made me feel sophisticated just by being in the same room with him. But the truth was, I had been avoiding telling Ella about the engagement because I knew she would ask questions I didn't want to answer. Questions about whether Ryan really loved me or just loved the idea of me. Questions about why he never seemed completely comfortable around her. Questions that would force me to admit that the man I was planning to marry had never once made an effort to truly know my sister. That phone call was the first time I chose Ryan's comfort over Ella's feelings. It wouldn't be the last. Planning a wedding with Ryan turned out to be like planning a business merger. Everything had to be perfect, calculated, designed to make the right impression on the right people. The venue, the flowers, the photographer, the guest list. Every decision was filtered through one question. What will people think? I didn't realize how much this mindset was changing me until the day we went to taste wedding cakes and Ryan spent 20 minutes explaining to the baker exactly how he wanted our engagement photos displayed at the reception. We need the lighting to be flattering, he said, studying the sample photos with the intensity of an art critic. Emma photographs beautifully, but we want to make sure everything looks polished and professional. The baker, a sweet older black woman who reminded me of my grandmother, smiled politely and nodded. But I caught the way her eyes flicked between Ryan and me, and I felt something uncomfortable settle in my stomach. Later, in the car, Ryan was quiet for several blocks before he finally spoke. "I've been thinking about the wedding party," he said carefully. "I know you want Ella as your maid of honor, but have you considered how that might look in the photos?" My hands went cold. "What do you mean, how it might look?" "Emma, baby, I love that you're loyal to your sister. It's one of the things I adore about you. But think about it practically. She'll need help walking down the aisle. She won't be able to see where to stand for pictures, and honestly..." He paused, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "My family and my business associates are going to be there. These photos will be in our home for the rest of our lives. She's my twin sister, Ryan. And she'll always be your sister. But this is our wedding day. Shouldn't it be about us?" The way he said it made it sound so reasonable, so logical. Like caring about how our wedding photos looked was just common sense, not something shallow and cruel. That conversation planted a seed that grew over the next 6 months of wedding planning. Every vendor meeting, every decision about the ceremony, every discussion about the guest list somehow came back to appearances and impressions. Ryan's world was full of people who judged everything by surfaces, how things looked, how they seemed, how they reflected on your status and success. And slowly, without realizing it, I started seeing everything through that lens too, including my sister. The shift happened gradually. Where I used to see Ella's strength and resilience, I started noticing her white cane and the way she sometimes needed extra time to navigate unfamiliar spaces. Where I used to admire her grace and dignity, I started worrying about whether other people would see her as different, as something that made our family look less polished. Ryan never said anything directly cruel about Ella.
He was too smart for that.
Instead, he made careful observations wrapped in concern for my feelings. "I just want you to have the perfect day you deserve," he would say. "You've worked so hard to build this life. You should be able to enjoy your wedding without worrying about anything else." The worst part was that I started to believe him. I started to think that maybe having a blind maid of honor would be a distraction from what should be the happiest day of my life. Maybe people would spend the whole ceremony watching Ella instead of celebrating Ryan and me. Maybe the photos would always remind me of the accident instead of our joy. These thoughts made me hate myself, but I couldn't seem to stop having them. 3 months before the wedding, Ryan's mother invited me to lunch at the country club where she spent most of her time. Margaret Hartwell was the kind of woman who never said anything directly rude, but somehow made you feel inadequate just by being in her presence. She had perfect silver hair, perfect posture, and a perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I'm so excited about the wedding, dear," she said over salads that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. "Ryan has shown me some of the preliminary plans, and everything looks absolutely beautiful." "Thank you, Mrs. Hartwell. We're really excited too. I do hope you don't mind me saying, but I noticed your sister is listed as the maid of honor." She paused delicately, the way people do when they're about to say something they know they shouldn't. "Ryan mentioned that she has some challenges?" The word hung in the air like a slap. Challenges. As if Ella's blindness was a character defect instead of the result of an accident that could have happened to anyone. "Ella is blind," I said quietly. "But she's also one of the strongest, most capable people I know." "Oh, of course, dear. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just that weddings can be so stressful, and you want everything to go smoothly. Perhaps there's another role she could play? Something that wouldn't require quite so much coordination." I should have stood up and walked out. I should have told Margaret Hartwell that my sister was worth more than her entire social circle combined. I should have called Ryan immediately and told him that if his family couldn't accept Ella, they couldn't accept me. Instead, I smiled politely and said I would think about it. That night, Ryan and I had our first real fight about the wedding. Not about Ella specifically, but about everything his mother's lunch had stirred up inside me. "Your mother basically suggested that Ella shouldn't be my maid of honor because she's blind," I said as we sat in his pristine living room, surrounded by furniture that looked expensive but felt cold. "She's just worried about you," Ryan said calmly. "Mom wants everything to be perfect for us. She knows how important this day is." "More important than my relationship with my sister?" "Emma, no one is saying you have to choose between me and Ella. But maybe Mom has a point about finding a different role for her. Something special that would be more suitable." That word. Suitable. Like Ella was a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. She's my twin sister, Ryan. We've been planning to be each other's maids of honor since we were kids. And that was a beautiful childhood dream. But we're adults now, with adult responsibilities. This wedding is going to be photographed, videotaped, talked about by everyone we know. Don't you want it to be something you can look back on with pure joy? The horrible thing was that his arguments made sense in the twisted logic of his world. In Ryan's universe, appearance was everything, and anything that might detract from the perfect image was a problem to be solved. And I was so deep in that universe by then that I couldn't see my way out. 2 weeks later, I asked Ella to step down as my maid of honor. I told her it was because I wanted to ask Ryan's sister instead, to help bring our families together. I told her she could do a special reading during the ceremony, something that would be meaningful and important but wouldn't require walking down the aisle or standing for long periods in heels. Ella listened to my explanation in silence, her face carefully neutral in the way it got when she was trying not to cry. "Of course," she said finally. "Whatever you think is best for your day." But I heard the hurt in her voice, the way she said, "your day" instead of "our day" like she used to. And I knew that something fundamental had broken between us. I told myself it was temporary, that after the wedding, things would go back to normal between Ella and me, that I was just being practical about one day, not choosing Ryan over my sister for the rest of my life. I had no idea that this decision was just the beginning, that Ryan's obsession with perfection would keep growing, keep demanding more sacrifices, until the morning of my wedding when he would ask me to make a choice that would haunt me forever. The choice between the man I thought I loved and the sister who had loved me unconditionally since the day we were born. A choice that would teach me the difference between someone who wants you to be perfect and someone who sees your perfection exactly as you are. But on that day, 2 weeks before my wedding, I thought I was just making a small compromise to keep everyone happy. I didn't know I was about to discover what happens when you trade your heart for other people's approval. The final weeks before the wedding felt like being caught in a whirlwind that was spinning faster and faster, pulling me away from everything that used to matter. Ryan's attention to detail, which I had once found impressive, started to feel suffocating. Every conversation became about the wedding, every decision had to be approved by him, and somehow every choice came back to the same question: how would it look to other people? "I've been thinking about the seating arrangement," Ryan said one evening as we sat in his apartment going over the final guest list for the 100th time. "My business partner James is bringing his wife, and she's very influential in the charity circuit. We should make sure she has a good view of the ceremony." I looked up from the table arrangements I had been working on for hours. What about my family? Where are we putting my mom and Ella? Of course they'll have good seats. But Emma, you have to think strategically here. James could help my business grow exponentially after we're married. His wife could introduce you to the right social circles. This wedding isn't just about one day. It's about building our future. Our future. The way he said it made it sound like I was supposed to be grateful that he was including me in his plans, rather than us building something together. But every time doubt crept in, Ryan had a way of making me feel like I was being unreasonable. He would pull me close and remind me how much he loved me, how much he wanted to give me the life I deserved. He would show me photos of the honeymoon resort in Bali, or talk about the house we would buy together, or mention the promotion he was expecting that would change everything for us. "I just want to take care of you," he would say, and his voice would be so sincere that I would push down the uncomfortable feelings and convince myself that this was what love looked like. Someone who wanted to protect you from anything that might hurt or embarrass you, even if that something was your own sister. The distance between Ella and me grew wider every week. Where we used to talk every day, now we barely spoke unless I needed something or she called to check on wedding preparations. When we did talk, the conversations felt strained and careful, like we were both trying not to say the wrong thing. "How are things going with the planning?" she would ask, and I could hear her trying to sound supportive despite everything. "Good. Stressful, but good. You know how it is." Except she didn't know how it was, because I had stopped including her in any of the real decisions. I had stopped asking for her opinion about flowers or music or whether the ceremony should be religious or secular. I had stopped treating her like my best friend and started treating her like an obligation. The worst part was that I could tell she was building a life without me. She mentioned new activities, volunteer work at a center for the visually impaired, people she was meeting who shared her interests in advocacy and accessibility. She sounded happier when she talked about these things than she had in months, and instead of being glad for her, I felt resentful. Like she was moving on without me while I was planning the most important day of my life. I've been doing some volunteer work with this organization that helps newly blind adults learn to navigate the world, she told me during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. It's amazing how much strength people can find when they realize they're not alone. That sounds nice, I said, distracted by a text from Ryan about whether we should use ivory or cream napkins at the reception. Emma, are you listening? Sorry, what? I said I've been volunteering. It's actually really meaningful work. I'm helping people who are going through what I went through after the accident. That's great, Ella. Really? But even as I said it, I was thinking about how Ryan's mother would react if she knew my sister was spending her time with other disabled people. How it might reflect on us if anyone connected Ella's volunteer work to our family. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't seem to stop having it. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ryan's behavior shifted into overdrive. He started making lists of everything that could go wrong and contingency plans for each potential disaster. Rain on the wedding day, vendors running late, guests arriving early, traffic delays. He had a solution for everything. Except the problem he saw in my family. I've been thinking about your sister's reading during the ceremony, he said one evening as we reviewed the wedding timeline. Maybe we should have a backup plan in case she gets nervous or confused about where to stand. Ella won't get confused. She's been practicing with the minister, and she knows the layout of the church. I'm sure she's very capable. But Emma, think about it from the guest's perspective. They might be distracted watching her navigate the steps instead of listening to the reading. Maybe we should record her doing the reading beforehand and just play the recording during the ceremony? The suggestion was so cruel and thoughtless that I actually laughed. You want to record my sister reading a poem and play it like a soundtrack while she sits silently in the audience? I'm just trying to think of ways to make the ceremony flow smoothly. By pretending my sister doesn't exist? That's not what I said. His voice took on that patient tone he used when he thought I was being emotional instead of logical. I'm trying to protect both of you. If something goes wrong with her reading, she'll be embarrassed and you'll be upset. This way, everyone wins. But I could see the truth in his eyes. This wasn't about protecting Ella's feelings. This was about protecting his image, his perfect wedding, his need for everything to look flawless to his family and friends. That night, I called my mother for the first time in weeks. You sound stressed, baby, she said after I had rambled for 10 minutes about seating charts and flower arrangements and whether the photographer was reliable enough for such an important day. I just want everything to be perfect. For who? The question caught me off guard. For me. For Ryan. For everyone. Emma, honey, do you remember what you used to say when you were little about your wedding day? I didn't remember, but I could hear the sadness in her voice. You used to say that all you wanted was for everyone you loved to be happy and together. You said you didn't care about fancy dresses or expensive flowers. You just wanted Ella standing next to you and everyone you cared about celebrating with you. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had said that. When I was 8 years old and Ella and I would play wedding with our dolls, I would always insist that the most important part was having your sister there to share the joy. I still want that, I said quietly.
Do you?
Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're planning a wedding that has very little room for the people who actually love you. After I hung up with my mother, I sat in my apartment, the apartment I had barely spent time in since getting engaged because I was always at Ryan's place, and tried to remember the last time I had felt genuinely happy about my wedding instead of stressed and anxious. I couldn't. 2 weeks before the wedding, Ella called with news that should have made me happy. I wanted you to hear this from me first, she said, and there was something different in her voice. Something lighter and more confident than I had heard in months. I've met someone. My first thought wasn't joy for my sister. It was panic about how this would affect the wedding. Met someone how? Where? Through the volunteer work I mentioned. He's been helping with fundraising for the center, and we've gotten to know each other over the past few months. Emma, he's wonderful. He's kind and funny, and he treats me like. She paused, searching for the right words. Like, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. That's great, I said, but my mind was